recommendations we have, which going forward is not exactly addressing this point, but somehow is related to that, is government should bid infrastructure projects based on best facility for least public expense instead of revenue generation for the government. So in a way that's related, that's the same thing, same banana, which in the end will anyway and always be paid by the public. Isn't it that we deserve the best infrastructure at the least possible cost and not revenue generation? I think revenue generation should be done by BIR and by the Bureau of Customs, but not by not through infrastructure at the expense of the public.
Before we throw it open to questions from the floor, I want to just ask you on the panel, we're in the last 2 minutes of this administration. If you have one wish that you want, that you need to happen for the sector that you're talking about, what would it be? And who wants to go first? Power.
Clear planning and implementation, clear and transparent planning and implementation, and capital allocation policy for all infrastructure.
I would say strengthening the bureaucracy, putting more permanent people in place. The port authority head is an appointed person. That means every single one changes the whole plan. So I think some of these lower level people should actually be like government corporations that think very long term and are able to implement. The other thing too is that there are too many silos. It's got to be one integrated idea. This transcends everybody. And it should be a one national overall idea of creating these clusters around the country.
Neil.
I think institutional strengthening is definitely one thing, but in terms of the airports, and the debate seems to be in the newspapers every second day, but I'd like to see some sort of direction regarding the development of a new airport in Manila Bay versus the Clark solution before this particular administration retires.
The PPP Center's mandate is to push the agencies to proceed with their PPP projects. What my wish would be is that they have continuity and sense of urgency of putting out these projects, diligently prepared, and Ma'am Doris, I agree, putting up a dedicated, permanent PPP team that will work on these projects. And finally, continuous dialogue with the private sector. Dialogue as early as preparation stages so that we get their inputs, and in the end, we end up with a partnership agreement that's, both viable to the private sector and to government. Thank you.
Well, coming from the Department of Energy, wherein we experience a lot of project delays because of conflicting regulations. So my wish is really streamlining, having the different regulators or government agencies have a better appreciation of our respective mandates and work together.
Well, I will take a little bit of liberties how to interpret one, but the recommendations we have, beside the one which I mentioned already in how to look at tendering infrastructure projects, which I think is probably for me the most important, allow and facilitate multimodal transshipments by air and sea, start the process of establishing a true free port zone in Subic facility for global distribution and particularly Asian and ASEAN distribution of goods, start and open free competition to provide public bonded, particularly airport warehousing services, because that's very expensive. It's regulated by the Bureau of Customs. The Bureau of Customs has no investment there, and it's just mandating, it's just establishing a tariff which has to be paid by the public. I think there are some reforms needed there. Thanks.
Thank you. We have 15 minutes to take questions from the audience. Please raise your hand. A mic will come your way. Tell us who you are and the question you're asking. At the central table, go ahead.
Ako po ay si Ernesto Ordonez, Alianza Agricultura at Cement Manufacturers at Federation Philippines. Ito po yung tanong ko. This is my question. I represent both the farmers and the industrialists. Here's my question. It is true that port congestion has decreased significantly. because of external forces such as the Chinese New Year. In 6 weeks, I agree with Mr. Robert, it's gonna rear its ugly head again. And therefore, I'd like to commend Doris So and people like Christian, because we submitted on behalf of the private sector to Secretary Almendras and to the Senate and the House your long-range plan. We submitted it. But in the short run, we have to move. And therefore, my question, Mr. Robert, is this. When prices went down for oil, DTI called all of them to ask if you could please decrease prices. While we have no price control, DTI has price ranges called the suggested retail price. This was asked of the shipping lines, and there's been never a discussion on the ranges up to now. And now that there's no port congestion, the rates are still high. Mr. Robert, I'd like to ask you this. Do you not believe that if DTI can handle cement, which I do, and pigs, which I do, it should also handle the lines by asking them to please justify? And if justified, it's fine. But if there's no discussion on this, why is it sacred when cement and pigs and sardines are not sacred? So do you believe this should be done? The reason I ask this is because in a few weeks it's gonna come up again, and we gotta get this thing under control. Mr. Robert, can you answer my question, please, about DTI calling on the shipping lines to find out? Maybe they're correct, but at least find out what's happening, because up to now, we have no idea what the ranges are. And I'm not for price control. I'm saying we should guide it the same way we guide sardines, etc. There's no price, at least there's a range. Mr. Robert, can you answer my question, please?
Well, I'm not sure if I understood the question very well, but I presume you are asking why the shipping rates are not going down now that their port congestion has been alleviated, at least for now, and the fuel prices have been going down as well. Is that
may I restate my question, so it's very focused? My question is, do you believe a government agency should call the shipping lines the same way they call cement and sardines and pork to find out what the price levels should be given a range? Because the trucks have gone up too, and the shipping lines have gone up. Now there's no port congestion. It's still there. Should they not at least call? Do you believe in that principle of the role of government in this particular area? That's my question.
Ernie, are you talking about international import-export cargo freight or domestic?
Well, I'm talking about generally the price have gone up for both domestic and international. But just as I ask questions about cement and sardines, I want them to ask questions about
I think basically, I mean, we were listening to Ciel Habito earlier. The best way of ensuring we have the best pricing is supply competition, right? And so what you're suggesting is that we actually put the opposite, which is actually to impose rates. And I think that's basically the trend today, is not to go that way.
I think
right?
you misunderstand me, because I was in DTI. We don't want to impose. However, we want to benefit the consumers by having the free flow of information. If there is free flow of information on cement and sardines and pork, why should there not be free flow of information, and then let the people decide? Because I'm asking you, I guess, if you believe that the government should treat different things in the same way. That's my question. Right. Not that we'll impose, but at least there's a range, because I know some trucking companies are way out of line. And if you do that for sardines, the government calls you and usually they behave. It is not imposition, it is discussion.
Well, Ernie, I think the chambers themselves and private industry has actually volunteered or suggested for the government to recreate or reactivate the Shippers' Council to take up certain issues with the shipping lines. Doris just mentioned, obviously, that it's impossible to legislate or to control prices or to dictate prices. They are determined by demand and supply. And the shipping lines will impose rates in whatever kind of abbreviation through the whole alphabet. depending on demand and supply. On the other side, I think it is very important to get all industry players to the table and remind them of their respective liabilities and responsibilities. So first of all, the dialogue which has been started with your working group and Secretary Almendra should continue and probably be expanded, and perhaps also with addition to reactivation of the Shippers Council. When I talk about liabilities and responsibilities, I don't know if it was billions, but hundreds of millions of pesos in demurrage and detention charges have been paid to the shipping lines. For me, it is very clear that they have a responsibility to take care of the empty containers once they are being returned. You cannot penalize the importers for these kind of charges and then run away from any responsibility when it goes the other way. So that is just one example as to where government actually should come in and at least through a constructive dialogue come to some conclusions.
Okay, next question, please. John, you're the host. You're third in line. Well, he's getting to the mic first.
I've been told by my European colleague I'm not allowed to. Henry, with your permission, please. I can't resist the opportunity of having Mr. Bentley with us to give us his opinion on an issue that we've all been grappling with for over 2 decades, almost since Pinatubo erupted in mid-1991. The Philippines has never built its own greenfield major gateway airport. It's depended on World War II and Cold War facilities of the Americans. Now we are at a very critical point of congestion with this valuable in-city airport. But we also have a legacy airport not too far away. I don't see a government in the near future solving the congestion issue here at NAIA. We have a tourism goal of 10 million by 2016. And we have $8 billion of investment going into casinos near NAIA. What would you advise the government to do? Maybe the next administration, because this one hasn't solved this conundrum. Thank you.
Great question.
All right, thank you, John. Well, as you say, this has been going on for over 20 years, and I think I have some observations regarding this. One is regarding Clark Airport. If it was attractive in terms of being developed into an international gateway airport, I feel that it may have happened by now. And the Airport Authority at Clark has done a very good job since 2005 in attracting new international and domestic carriers to the airport, and in fact has done some expansion work. But I have to say that success has been limited and has not put a dent on the growth that's taken place at NAIA. So Clark Airport to me is just another airport in the system within the Philippines. And the other airports in the system are very important, but they are not as important as NAIA. You mentioned that the country hasn't had much experience in developing a new greenfield international airport, and that's true. However, I feel that under a privatization regime, international skills can be brought to bear in order to develop and operate a new international airport in the Manila region. And so far, Manila Bay has really only been the only real option that's been put forward by various parties. And there are some options on the table regarding Manila Bay. I think the most prohibitive factor for that solution is cost, because we are talking about a massive reclamation scheme to implement that, and it would be of the order of $10 billion or more. So it's quite large. And airports, generally speaking, are not necessarily big money makers. The big money-making airports have been airports which have been privatised, where the government has already invested in a fixed asset. So in other words, the private sector's come in, they bought an existing operation, and they've been able to make a lot of money. But in the case of a new greenfield airport with a huge amount of reclamation and other fixed costs, it's going to be a challenge even for the private sector. So I personally feel that if a proper model was developed, you'd still be looking at a government contribution to that type of solution in order to make it work financially. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, or it should not be looked at as a negative. So the thing is, with respect to airports, especially city airports and capital city airports, accessibility and convenience to the city is paramount. It's absolutely paramount. So travel time to the city areas, whether it's your home or whether it's your business location to the airport, has to be within 45 minutes as a benchmark to be considered reasonable or attractive. So that's the problem with the Clark solution. It is at least a couple of hours away by road. And whilst we can talk about high-speed rail connections, which would bring the travel time down to something like 45 minutes or less, the real practicality and cost of implementing that, I think, is a major impediment to that solution. Even if you were to overcome the investment costs, you still have the operational cost and the cost of tickets, and that would I think, be prohibitive for most people. So it's a difficult dilemma, and it's been going on for a very long period of time. I think there's some hope there if we can look to the private sector and structure a way to make it work, which has not really been fully investigated in the past. In the past, it's always been a government type of solution, government looking towards government funds or concessional funds from overseas, but maybe some sort of hybrid funding solution, perhaps involving the national government, overseas development funds, and also the private sector can help make this work. It's absolutely critical that something is done very soon, because as you mentioned, the existing airport is running at capacity right now. And the problem with airports which are running at capacity is that there's a tendency in the growth scenario for more and more traffic to try and squeeze in. And unfortunately, what can happen is that safety can be compromised. And that is the last thing that you want to happen. So there's a lot of pressure there right now. And I would urge that some sort of decision-making forum, body led by government be set up to actually bring this to a closure, because really the debate's been going on for too long.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We have room for, I'm being told, a question coming in from people watching the live stream. This is for you, Sec Mansada. Some new plants' capacity are curtailed because of lack of transmission capacity, actually generation. So transmission and distribution. What are the commitments of NGCP to connect new generation capacity? What are the commitments? How will we get transmission? If we generate the electricity, how will we get it to the consumers?
Well, as noted, we have some also transmission congestion in some parts of the country. Yeah, especially as we as we have the renewable energy things coming in, then we have these issues, but these are being addressed by the NGCP. So, in fact, some of the renewable energy projects themselves put up the transmission lines to connect to the grid. So there's efforts by both the NGCP, which is in charge of the transmission, and even some support from the private sector, the power plant, and the RE developer. But everything will have to be passed on to the NGCP for the calculation with the transmission charges. But that has been recognized, and efforts are being done to address the congestion.
Okay, so given everything that you've actually said, would you like to add anything to this?
NGCP is a regulated entity, so it cannot, it dares not risk making an investment that isn't approved by the regulator. Otherwise, it won't be allowed to collect revenues to recover the cost and earn on those assets. So in general, with respect to transmission lines, either the NGCP waits until it gets approval from the regulator before even starting to get the right of way and buy the transmission assets, or somebody else has to risk his capital.
How bad will it get during our summer months now?
Well, there are a few dates I'm worried about. One is April 5 to 15.
April 5 to 15.
And also possibly March 16 to 18.
And that is because Malampaya.
Well, Malampaya is down for March 16.
Got it.
I'm not too worried about the second week of, or first week of April, because that's Easter. Demand is very low.
Right.
But when everybody comes home,
got it.
and it's very hot in the summer, then
Yes, please.
May I
Undersecretary.
just note that not because Malampaya is on shutdown, the natural gas power plants are down. They run on alternative fuel, which is liquid, but the capacity that they can have is not the same as if they're running on natural gas.
And the problem with that is, even though we have a lot of energy that can come in from wind power, is that the transmission lines can't bring it to where it needs
Yes,
to
that's
go,
why
right?
we are coming up with a protocol on how to allocate the wind capacity in North Luzon, because we have at the moment 282 megawatts of wind capacity in just North Luzon.
So, given what you have said in this panel, the things that you want, clear planning, strengthening bureaucracy, too many silos, direction for government, a sense of urgency for the agencies, conflicting regulations, it sounds like the top-down reforms haven't actually hit the bottom, hit reality. Is that a correct assessment? Go, Doris. Is that too harsh?
I think you know, I said earlier that we need to develop the whole bureaucracy and put institutions. And I understand that in the past, the NEDA actually were the ones that coordinated all the silos and put together a plan. And I would say, if I were in charge, that I would get the NEDA to really be a really great agency and go back to the planning. I think we're lacking that long-term, and it should not be a 6-year plan, by the way. It should be
Can't
20
be.
years.
Yeah.
And we should have that. I mean, Ernie asked about, I think we do a lot of Band-Aid here. Even the Shipping Council, sorry, Michael, that's another Band-Aid. What we need to do is have a structure in place. Like during the Typhoon Yolanda, even Cebu could not be the relief center. And guess what? Today, Cebu still is not planning to be a place where you could put logistics structure to take care of all that needs of the Visayas. And my guess is the reason cement is expensive, it's not because they're shipping. It's the cost of that bloody cement. Shipping is, gosh, promise, shipping is such a small % of your cost. So please stop thinking it's shipping. It's not. It's the whole structure that's missing. It's not, nobody's sitting down thinking about how to get the delivery system in place.
Well, one of the other things you said, though, is that we're not even ready for the future, that we're only dealing with the capacity, being able to handle what growth has brought to us, right? So last question, I think we're at the tail end for you guys. Sige, sorry, you've been standing there. Please go ahead. Give us...
Thank you. Jun Palo Fox. We have 3 kinds of infrastructure. Progressive, which includes the airports and seaports. and international hospitals and so on. Hard infrastructure, the roads, other utilities. And soft infrastructure, the ease of doing business. Neil and I have worked on the Manila International Airport in 2004. But our recommendations to upgrade it for the next 15 years while waiting for Clark. I worked on Clark with American consultants, John Casarda, the author of Airport-Driven Cities. All of these plans and proposals, long-term proposals, immediate action proposals, are suffering from analysis paralysis. And when the Americans were here, Commonwealth government, we had more than 200 airports and runways. I'm told we only have 80 now, and only 8 are lighted. So the plans are there, we just have to update it. And Doris is right, it should not only be short-term and opportunistic, it should also be long-term and visionary. And maybe for Michael, I'm told that the cost of logistics in our country for products and services is 30% of cost. The better planned countries and cities elsewhere in the world, only 8%. Thank you. You may want to comment if there's time.
Thank you. Please.
Quick response to your summary of the wishes that we had. How do we operationalize or make them happen? One area that we need to work on is policy. And as I guess I was articulated very clearly a while ago, amendment of the BOT law into the PPP Act put institutionalizing reforms and process improvements we've done so far. And on the last, may we thank the Chambers of Commerce for supporting that very urgent measure. Thank you very much.
Let me give you guys your last statement on this one. This is the year, AEC 2015, December. The ASEAN community, we joined 600 million, 650 million community. Where do you see the Philippines? Are we going to sink or swim in this? And as the government goes out, how do we continue to get progress? Sorry. Oh my gosh, please. All right, I'll shut up. Please go ahead. Your question. You've been standing there as well.
Maria, I would never interfere with you, ever.
Sorry, I have them.
No, really. But part of my comment and the question I have, and this gentleman here got me to thinking, he talked about at one point the free flow of information. I think we are inundated weekly, if not daily, by these grandiose announcements from our government, especially the PPP, of various and sundry projects that are being awarded, that are being rebidded, et cetera, et cetera. And then very often, that's the end of it. We don't hear anything more. I don't know where to go for information. I don't know how to get an update on all these projects. It's just not readily available. I would like to propose that in this modern age of modern technology, a layman's website, which is honest and direct, tells us the status of every single project. I think it's the responsibility of Rappler and the entire press community to be as aggressive about this. I'll give you an example, then I'll shut up. The connecting road between the NLEX and the SLEX, which is so critically important, which would get trucks where they belong, would get them into ports where they need to go, which tie this whole thing together. What the hell is happening? We've been told time again it's been bidded. Now I see, new bids are being put out. Well, go down South Superhighway, go to Vita Cruz, and you will see an overhead highway to nowhere. It starts at Vita Cruz and it ends at Carino. There is no sign of an attachment to SLEX at Bundia, and there's no sign of where that road's going to go. And there's no word. All we see is signs, construction in progress, please take alternative routes. We need to know these things, and I suggest that the public is probably more frustrated about this, and it probably politically is not healthy for the administration that we don't know more about these ballyhooed projects and what's happening with them.
I will say, not for lack of asking, that information is not publicly available.